Greetings and welcome to Gripping Horror. In the heart of Leicestershire, between Stoney Stanton and Broughton Astley, lies Stoney Cove. Known as the National Diving Centre of England, this site is used by about 60,000 divers each year. Tragically, at least one diver has drowned each year since the centre opened in 1978. In 2003, the centre was fined £7,500 and ordered to pay more than £40,000 in costs following the death of an amateur diver. Still, its allure continues to pull both experienced and beginner divers into its frigid waters, day after day. These are the tragedies of Richard Stansfield and Roger Clark. While England may be known for its rainy weather, ancient Stonehenge, and talented musicians, don't discount this country's love for scuba diving. The United Kingdom is one of the cold water diving capitals of the world. In fact, with 12,429 kilometers or 7,723 miles of coastline and over 40,000 inland bodies of water, the island maintains a profound connection to the sea. One would think that being an island should mean that coastal diving locations are plentiful in the UK, but even still its diving community has turned towards inland diving amid lakes, lochs and quarries. Stoney Cove is self-described as the UK's most popular inland diving centre. It is one of three that lie in the village of Stoney Stanton. The other two have been infilled. Stoney Cove, and ultimately Stoney Stanton, is situated in the county of Leicestershire, central England. The quarry first began production at the beginning of the 19th century, when granite was used to repair roads. In 1850, a railway line was built to move granite from the bottom to the top of the pit. When quarrying died out in 1958, spring water, which had been a constant problem during the pit's working years, was allowed to flood the quarry. Diving in the quarry first started around the 1960s. During this time, the quarry was primarily used to train commercial divers en route for the North Sea oil fields. As scuba diving gained popularity, Stoney Cove transitioned into the amazing underwater adventure park it is today. While the site is widely enjoyed by all levels of divers, it is still used to train police divers, US Air Force, and even the Historic Diving Society. Stoney Cove has numerous underwater attractions, both original and deliberately placed. The site includes a helicopter, bus, boats, armoured cars, shipwrecks, and even a submarine. There is also plenty of fish life, such as perch, roach, pike, and crayfish. The 12.5-acre quarry consists of three main levels: a 6-metre shelf area, ideal for beginner training, a 36-metre sump for more advanced training, and the main body consisting of two large 22-metre deep areas. The deepest parts of Stoney Cove are dark, cold, and a far cry from the comparatively tropical shallows. This area is strictly for advanced and experienced divers. Temperatures are much colder, and as you descend down from the 20-metre cliff, it feels like somebody switched the lights off. The silty bottom is also a hazard, so divers must take care not to disturb the sediment and reduce visibility. The deepest part of the quarry is known as the pit and reaches a maximum depth of 115 feet, or 35 meters. For those who are experienced, there is one point of interest in this area: the deep hydro box. Comprising a 5-meter tall metal structure, the box is designed to provide a dry working environment for underwater tasks, such as welding. Divers exploring the box can swim through the top opening and out through the bottom. Great care must be taken when exploring the box, due to the depth, risk of reduced visibility, and entering an enclosed, overhead space inside the box. Navigating the features in Stoney Cove isn't always as simple as may seem, especially if the visibility isn't great. Thus, it's recommended that divers plan a route using multiple waypoints before entering. Nigel Craig, a veteran diver with 20 years of experience, had a deep passion for diving that completely ceased to exist after the 24th of July, 2016. A builder by trade, Nigel had been interested in diving since he was a boy, but it was only when he had his own young family that he embarked on PADI training courses, initially abroad and then in 1996 at Stoney Cove, where he practiced his newfound craft. With each dive, he became more entranced with the water, forging a connection that would define his life. As the years passed, Nigel made hundreds of dives at the Quarry as a diver. Nigel would attend weekly pool sessions and spend Saturdays at the Dive Northampton shop and Sundays diving. Over time, he had progressed through the training until he qualified as a PADI Master Instructor in 2013. Over the years, he certified 300 students and assisted in the certification of countless others. Among them was a student named Richard Stansfield, who was in the midst of certification process. Richard Stansfield, an electrician from Northampton, was not your typical 40-year-old. With a firm dedication to his work at high-tech electrical, he had gained a reputation for his meticulous attention to detail and innovative problem-solving skills. Yet, beyond his work, Richard harboured a lesser-known passion for diving. His weekends were often spent exploring the depths of Stoney Cove, which, after gaining his advanced open water certification, allowed him to venture into more advanced sections. On Sunday, the 24th of July, 2016, Nigel began the PADI Deep Speciality Course dive for Richard. It was the second dive of the PADI Deep Speciality course, the first of which Richard had already completed during his advanced open water program. The course helps divers to better understand the effects of pressure at depth and the importance of making safety stops to mitigate the potential for decompression sickness. The maximum allowable depth of the dive is 40 meters and includes a short navigation swim before making a free ascent using gauges or a dive computer to maintain a safe ascent rate. The course standards mandate a 3-minute safety stop at 5 meters before surfacing. The day before the dive, Nigel had been through some checks at the Dive Northampton shop with Richard. Richard was Nigel's only dive student that day and was accompanied by dive master Carol Tokarczyk, with whom he had dived previously and with whom Nigel had worked several times before. After the briefing and safety check, the team swam approximately 100 meters to a descent line, marking the hydro box. The team stopped at the marker buoy to allow an out-of-breath Richard time to recover after the surface swim. It took around 10 minutes more to reach the dive's maximum depth of approximately 105 feet or 32 meters, as Richard had problems equalizing. Nigel took an air check at the bottom, and Richard indicated he had 150 bar remaining in his 12-litre cylinder, having started the dive with 250. Nigel and Carol were using 12-litre twin sets, plenty for both themselves and as a contingency supply if necessary. Richard struggled with his buoyancy during his first attempt at the navigation exercise, so Nigel cut him short to repeat the skill, which he did successfully. At this point, Nigel performed a second air check and received a signal for 60 bar in response. This was much less than Nigel had expected, based on his earlier check, so he immediately ended the dive and began the ascent, instructing Carol to continuously monitor Richard's gauge on the way up. At about 59 feet, or 18 meters, Richard indicated he was out of air, despite at least 20 bar remaining in his tank. There was no indication of any heavy breathing and no sign of panic, so Nigel decided to swap him onto Carol's alternate regulator. Seeking reassurance from Richard, now breathing from Carol's twin set, the group continued to ascend, but Richard signaled once again that he was out of air. Nigel was confused. He purged the regulator, checked Carol's regulator, and everything was fine. Once again, the group had another out of air, and so Nigel decided to put him on his own regulator. They did the standard "look at my eyes, calm down" signals. Once Nigel got the okays, they carried on up. Approaching safety stop depth, Richard indicated he was okay and appeared calm, and with a more than adequate reserve of air, Craig judged it prudent to continue with the planned safety stop. As stated earlier, it is a requirement of the course and standard practice for recreational diving. 2 minutes into the safety stop, Richard appeared to panic and tried to bolt for the surface, so Nigel reached out to prevent him from making an unsafe ascent, during which the regulator from which he was breathing would have been pulled from his mouth. Nigel held him at the safety stop, made eye contact, checked their computers. They had about a minute or so left. Nigel took a second to think. He didn't understand why Richard was saying he's got no air when he's got air. Then Nigel looked up, and Richard's eyes had gone, appearing with a glazed look to them, with his regulators out of his mouth. Nigel indicated to Carol that he was going back to the surface. Nigel filled Richard's buoyancy control device and his own and ascended to the top. Carol took his weights off and ascended as well. On the surface, Nigel shouted for help and started rescue breathing. Richard was taken to the shore by Stoney Cove's rescue boat, where he was resuscitated by paramedics and taken by ambulance to hospital. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff, however, Richard was pronounced dead some 5 hours later. Nigel was interviewed by police in the aftermath of the incident and attended a voluntary interview in 2017 to clarify details of his original statement, but he was never treated as a suspect. A British Health and Safety Executive investigation found that neither he nor Dive Northampton had any case to answer. Nigel and his wife, Deela, moved on with their life as best they could until, in September 2020, more than 4 years after the tragic events of July 2016, Craig received a letter informing him that he would be prosecuted for gross negligence manslaughter. The prosecution based its entire case on the idea that Craig had held his unwilling student underwater, in the misguided belief that a safety stop was more important than preventing him drowning. Commander Baldwin's report into the incident tried to implicate Nigel's dive plan as the starting point for the fatality. Using the rule of thirds, he said Nigel should have ended the dive as soon as they reached their maximum depth. When Richard signalled, he had 160 bar remaining. Dive computer records submitted as evidence showed that Richard had misreported his air supply by as much as 30 bar during the first air check, which the prosecution told the jury was Craig's fault for not directly observing his student's computer. Crucially, Richard had been diagnosed with high blood pressure, for which he was taking medication and which he had failed to state in his medical declaration prior to taking the course. He was also found to have traces of alcohol and cocaine in his system, although it was not known if these might have had any bearing on the circumstances that led to his death. The crux of the prosecution case, however, was that the safety stop was not necessary and that Craig should have ascended to the surface with his out-of-air diver. A diver signalling out of air when they still have a working supply is a recognized sign of immersion pulmonary edema, a condition where the lungs spontaneously fill with fluid upon immersion in cold water, which, if untreated, eventually causes the diver to asphyxiate. It is most likely to occur in people with high blood pressure, which Richard had. The prosecution largely ignored that IPO was a possibility, claiming that it was not relevant. IPO was first described by Dr. Peter Wilmhurst, a senior member of the UK Diving Medical Committee, in 1989, but the dive community has been slow to recognise its dangers, so even as late as 2016, very few people knew anything about it. Dive computer printouts submitted as evidence to the court suggested that a small burst of air was released from Richard's tank during the safety stop, which the prosecution's expert witness concluded was air being put into his jacket. In what seemed like an attempt to further denigrate Nigel's competence as an instructor, the prosecution alleged that Craig had deliberately controlled his student's buoyancy to keep him underwater while he drowned. Much of the prosecution's case was debunked by expert technical, military, and cave diving instructor Kevin Gurr, who noted in his report for the defence that the dive team had a more than adequate emergency air supply, and because Richard was breathing and appeared calm during their air-sharing ascent, Nigel may have considered the safety stop appropriate. Once the closing arguments had been made, Nigel and his wife had to wait 2 days while the jury deliberated. With no news coming from the court, the couple discussed their financial future on the assumption he would be jailed. 2 days of deliberation resulted in a hung jury. The prosecution, for reasons known only to themselves, decided not to opt for a retrial, and the judge directed a verdict of not guilty. But for Nigel and Della, the damage had been done. Nigel lost his sole source of income as he could not cope with working through the month-long trial. He, Della, and their 2 children struggled through an emotional roller coaster, not knowing if he would be imprisoned. The local dive community lost an experienced and well-regarded instructor. Nigel is quoted on record saying, "I will never teach again. I would like to dive again, probably not in this country, but when I was out in Menorca last year, I did a bit of snorkeling, and even that messed with my head. I get very emotional very easily now, which was never the case before." Nearly 2 years later, Stoney Cove would find itself in the spotlight again. Tragically, another student's life would be lost, and an instructor's reputation will be forever tarnished. Lance Palmer, owner of LP Diving and Marine Services, has been in the diving business for over 30 years since leaving the military. Trained as a commercial diver, he has a wide background in many diving arenas, including working in the film industry as a marine supervisor on many films, including blockbusters such as 1917, James Bond, and Mamma Mia. Having established himself as a commercial diver, Lance set up his own business, servicing diving equipment for the recreational diving sector, which quickly grew into the business it is today. A busy service centre catering for divers, air gunners, and paintball enthusiasts. The current site has been in operation for many years and is now a familiar dive centre within the community. In June 2018, Lance was conducting an entry-level technical diving international closed-circuit rebreather course, in which Roger Clark, a 55-year-old experienced recreational diver and father of 2, was taking part in. During the inquest, it was revealed that Lance had serviced Roger's rebreather before the dive, which expert testimony found was carried out with significant failings. After completing their pre-dive checks and gearing up, the pair began their descent into the depths, along with a rescue diver. According to expert testimony, the rescue diver, which was chosen by Lance, was not adequately qualified and should not have been assigned for the dive. The course standards mandate a maximum depth for the dive of 98 feet, or 30 meters. However, Lance took Roger to Stoney Cove Sump, an area with a maximum depth of 35 meters and known for its poor visibility. The trio went as deep as 115 feet, or 35 meters, which, in the plankton-rich waters of this quarry, made it very green and dark. While in the sump, Roger's rebreather issued a number of alarms, requiring him to bail out onto his backup cylinder. However, Lance did not notice this, as he failed to remain in close enough proximity to monitor Roger, who was totally reliant on him, which meant he did not notice the audible and visual alarms sounding on Roger's breathing device. As the trio navigated around the sump, Roger suddenly became unconscious, and, following a failed attempt by Lance and the safety diver to return Roger to the surface, all 3 divers remained at 35 meters for 3 minutes, during which time it was shown that Roger had not been using any breathing apparatus. By the time Lance and his safety diver had brought Roger to the surface, he had drowned. After the post-mortem, they took him down to pathology for 18 weeks before they would give him back to his family for the funeral. Therefore, the funeral didn't take place until October the 26th. Lance admitted breaching Section 3 of the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. According to Health and Safety Executive Inspectors, this was a tragic and wholly avoidable incident caused by the failure of Lance Palmer to plan, manage and conduct his diving training in accordance with the law and his training agency's rules. In his conclusion, Ivan Cartwright, area courier for Leicester City and South Leicestershire, found that errors and omissions by Lance and safety diver significantly increased the risks associated with the dive and may have caused or contributed to Roger's death. Lance was sentenced at Leicester Magistrates Court on the 25th of January. He was ordered to undertake 50 hours unpaid work and costs of £3,085. In a family impact statement, Roger's widow, Angela, said that her husband's death has left her with a fear of water. She's quoted on record stating, "From the day I lost Roger to this day, I cannot get into water, not even a bath, and I can't even put my face into a shower. He was my world. We had a good lifestyle. We had everything. I lost my world and reason to live, and all I wanted to do was curl up and die, and to be with my husband. I have only one regret in my life, not being with my husband when he died." Stoney Cove Quarry remains a place of both adventure and caution, where the echoes of past tragedies serve as a somber reminder of the importance of meticulous preparation and utmost safety when exploring its waters. May Richard and Roger rest in peace. This has been Gripping Horror. I hope to see you in the next one.